This one time in Kankakee, a bank robber called me.
Welcome to This One Time in Kankakee from the WVLI Podcast Network. I'm Jake LaMore. Today we're sharing a story from Rob West, news director at Milner Media, which owns and operates WVLI, River Country, and WFAV, about the time he ended up on the phone with a bank robber. It's a story about trust, tension, and the strange ways people connect over the airwaves. Rob had spent years in radio. He had done almost everything except sales and sports.
I started in radio in Kankakee in 1985 as my sophomore year of college. I was going to school to be in broadcasting, and the opportunity came up to work overnights at a radio station in Kankakee. And so a friend of mine and I, who was also in the radio program, took these part-time jobs working overnights, midnight to 6 o'clock at this radio station in Kankakee. So I moved from there into full-time radio and moved to doing really just about everything that there is to do in radio. I've done everything in radio except sell and call sports. I've never called sports because I don't know enough about sports. I'm afraid I'd sound stupid, and I've never sold because I just can't take, I don't take rejection well. And if you're going to be in sales, you have to be able to take rejection well. As I was getting toward the end of my career at that radio station, I didn't know it at that time, but I moved into the newsroom and ended up being the news director.
It was 2008. A man had robbed a bank in Bourbonnais. The next morning, Rob covered the story.
A robber had robbed what was then the Centrue bank that sits at the corner of Convent and North Street there in Bourbonnais. A robber had robbed that on a particular night. The next morning, I go in and I write up the story about the bank robber, and he had gone in and he had said he had a gun. He didn't show a gun, but he had told the woman at the teller that he had a gun, which had scared her, of course. So she gave him whatever money was in the till at the time, and he left. So I wrote up the story and spent the morning talking about that.
Later that day, Rob got a call that would change everything.
I went home. It was about noon. I was watching a little bit of TV, and my cell phone rang. And I answered it, this is Rob. And the guy on the other end said, "Hi, I'm the bank robber." And first of all, I figured it was one of my friends pulling a prank on me, And I said, okay. And so we talked for a little bit. And the more we talked, the more convinced I became that he was indeed the bank robber. And I said, okay. I said, first of all, how'd you get my number? And he said, well, I called the radio station. I told the lady at the front desk I had information about last night's bank robbery. She gave me your number. And that's fair enough. I mean, I'm the news director. Somebody calls and says they have information about a story. Fair enough. I said, okay. I said, what do you want from me? And he said, I want you to tell my story. He said, I've listened to you on the radio. He said, I know I can trust you. He said, I want you to tell my side of the story. He said, I told the girl I had a gun. He said, I didn't have a gun. I don't carry a gun. He said, I couldn't shoot anybody. He said, I wouldn't shoot anybody.
Through that call, Rob learned more about the man, Rick James Pierce. The Daily Journal reported that Pierce had financial problems and a gambling addiction, which had led him to rob the bank. Police later determined he had lost the $2,650 he stole at a riverboat casino.
And we talked for a little bit, and I had a bit of a dilemma. Because while I am a news director, I'm also a citizen. And so I felt at least some obligation to let local law enforcement know that this conversation was being held. And so after I talked to the guy for a little bit, I said, would you continue this conversation with me if I were to be in the presence of the local police chief? His name was Joe Beard at the time. And he said, yeah, sure. I said, I'll tell you what, call me back in 10 minutes. He said, okay. So I go out and get in my car. I head over to the police station in Bourbonnais, and I call the police station ahead of time. I said, hi, Rob West from the radio station. So I just got off the phone with a guy who says that he robbed the bank last night. I said, I'm convinced that it was him. I said, is the chief around? And the dispatcher said, no, chief's not here. I'll get him. So by the time I got to the police station, the chief was there. We went into his office, and I put the guy on speakerphone, and we talked to him until my phone died.
Pierce's history was troubled. Reports from his hometown in Tennessee revealed that in 1977, he had killed his mother and taken a young girl hostage. He later pleaded insanity in Tennessee and spent time in mental health facilities. Pierce had also been charged with identity theft in Will County related to cashing stolen payroll checks.
I am fairly certain we were very close to getting him to come in and turn himself in that night, but my phone died, conversation ended. At one point, he said that he had stopped his car and he was standing outside about to hyperventilate because he was trying to make this decision. So at the end, as we were getting close to the end of the conversation, I said, hey, can you at least give me your name, your first name, so that when you get here, I can call you by your name and, shake your hand as you come to yourself in. And he gave me his first name. And that, of course, was enough for the police chief, who had suspected that this was the guy who had robbed the bank, but he didn't have evidence. It was enough for him to get a search warrant for the guy's apartment. He lived in the apartment complex just across the parking lot from the bank, the one that's just east of the bank there.
So the next morning, Rob went into the radio station and wrote up his story about the conversation with the bank robber. He shared the man's side of the story on the air.
About 7:30 that morning, I look up and there's Chief Beard walking down the hall of the radio station, which was a little odd. Didn't happen very often. So I was in the middle of a spot set or something. I was actually doing news, but I turned off my mic and said, Chief, what can I do for you? He walks into the newsroom. He said, Rob, he said, I wanted to let you know we had enough information. We served a search warrant at this guy's house. He said, we didn't find a gun. He said, we found some ammunition, but we didn't find a gun. And he said, here's the thing. He said, I get the feeling this guy has one more big thing in him. And he said, I don't want that to be killing Rob West. So I stopped, and that made me think for a minute. I mean, I was at the time driving around a big van that had my picture on the side of it. So I kind of changed a few things. I went ahead and did my job, went out and did my news rounds and but I drove my own car instead of driving the station van at the time.
Even in the middle of his ordinary workday, Rob had to make split-second choices for his own safety, all while keeping his focus on telling the story and connecting with the audience who trusted him. 2 days after the robbery, Pierce attempted suicide by slamming his car into concrete blocks at Ozinga Brothers on Route 50. Rob received a final call from him during that drive.
By this time, I recognized the phone number, so I get up and start headed to my car. As I answer the phone, I say, hey, how's it going? He said, just wanted you to know, I heard your newscast this morning. I wanted to thank you for telling my story. He said, I knew I could trust you, that you would tell my story. He said, you told it the way I told you. He said, I really wanted to thank you for that. And he said, I'm going to end this. And he said, I just wanted you to have the story. And of course, the thought comes into my mind, he's going to commit suicide. And so I am in my car. I get to the police station. I hold up my phone and ask for the chief. He comes out, put him on speakerphone. We're standing at a counter there at the Bourbonnais Police Station, and we're talking to the guy. I'm trying to get him to talk him in. And he's like, no. He said, you don't know what I've done. He said, I can't just come in. And we're like, no, it's not that bad. You can do this. No, I really can't. And then he says, the quarry on Route 50, and throws down his phone. And so his intention, I didn't know it at that time, but he was going northbound up Route 50 at a high rate of speed. His intention was to swing his car out and then hit those huge blocks that are right there by the entrance to the quarry and end his life.
Pierce's car rolled multiple times. Officers had positioned themselves based on his own description, and first responders pulled him from the wreckage. He was hospitalized, then taken into custody.
So he ended up being taken to the hospital, and that was really kind of the end of it for me. I never heard about or from him again.
Kankakee County court records indicate Rick James Pierce entered an insanity plea. On June 25, 2013, Pierce's defense attorney, Ed Glazer, presented Dr. Zoot's psychological evaluation of Pierce. In his report, Zoot stated Pierce has no insanity issue. Pierce was sentenced to 11 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, having to serve at least 50% of his sentence with 2 years mandatory supervised release. Pierce did receive credit for the time he already served from 2008 to 2013. However, his current whereabouts are unknown at this time. Reflecting on the events, Rob highlighted what made this experience so unique.
And there are people who do this job forever and never have a story like that to tell. And for me, it goes back to the relationship that you have in radio with your audience. There's a connection there. There's a relationship there. This guy had listened to me do the news. I don't know for how long, but he trusted me. And he trusted me with his story. And to me, that's just one of those things that you could go a lifetime and never have one of those stories. But there's that connectedness that people in radio have with their audience that just doesn't happen outside of the radio business. So that's my story about the time I talked with a bank robber.
That was Rob West, sharing the story of the day he spoke to a bank robber and the choices, trust, and humanity that emerged from a tense situation. You can hear Rob's newscasts every weekday on the WVLI News Update here on the WVLI Podcast Network or on any of Milner Media's radio stations every weekday morning. I'm Jake LaMore, and this has been This One Time in Kankakee. Got a story like that of your own? A moment you'll never forget that happened right here in Kankakee County? Email me at jake@milnermediapartners.com or send a message to Jake LaMore Media on Facebook or Instagram. And finish this sentence for me. This one time in Kankakee.